My family moved around quite a lot growing up. But the earliest place that I remember pretty clearly living in was actually the third place I lived. I was born in Warren, Pennsylvania, but I don't remember that because we moved almost immediately to Syracuse, New York. I don't remember that because we moved when I was so young again to Littleton, Massachusetts, which is a beautiful town. In fact, I visited it not too long ago, and it is far more beautiful than I remembered. Beautiful little town not too far from Boston. So as a result, we were Red Sox fans. I moved around after that. We went to Connecticut, and then we ended up in New Jersey, and then Virginia. And I rooted for the Phillies when I lived outside of Philadelphia. But I've always had this spot in my heart for the Red Sox. And if you know anything about sports, and if you don't, I'll just sort of exposit on this for you just a little bit. The Red Sox were one of those teams that has this long curse. Now, it's been broken. In 2004, they finally won a World Series for the first time since they made the fateful decision to let go of Babe Ruth. So they called him the Bambino, and they used to call it the curse of the Bambino. That because the Red Sox let go of Babe Ruth, they would never win a World Series, and they finally did. But in 1986, we were at the height of curse mania, because the Red Sox got all the way to the World Series, and they played the Mets. And there's this fellow named Bill Buckner. I think we have a picture of him. For those of you who might remember, Bill Buckner is the one who stood there at first base, and he had the easiest play in the history of the World Series. This little grounder that was just coming right to him. And if he had caught it and tagged the guy out or got the guy out at first base, the Red Sox were certain to go on to win the World Series, and it just sailed right through his legs. It was the most mind-boggling error you've ever seen, ever. I mean, it was worse than anything you'll see at a minor league baseball game, and there's a lot of people that decided they were going to hate him for the rest of his days because he kept the curse going. They held this grudge. Have you ever held a grudge? Don't nod. That's okay. I know you have. We all have. Maybe against somebody closer than just somebody that we saw on TV who missed a really perfect play. But we've held grudges, and to be honest, some of those grudges probably deserved by the person that you held them against. People have done things that are worthy of you thinking badly about them to you. And maybe you have to someone else who holds a grudge against you. Now, some people are better at holding grudges than others. Some people are incapable of it. That's a whole other dysfunction. I'm not going to talk about that one today. But most of us know what it means to either not be forgiven or to hold on to unforgiveness. This reality was certainly not strange to these folks in Corinth. There's one particular individual, we don't know all the details, but he has done something that is significant enough that he is now outside the fellowship of the believers. I can't imagine what he's done to offend people. All I know is, at this point, I think Paul has heard this guy's really at his wit's end from being excluded from the congregation. So Paul, one of the things he does in his letter is he addresses this one individual's issues with and he says the things we just heard in that beginning of the the second chapter of this 2 Corinthians letter. And there's a few things I notice about forgiveness that I want to point out that we learn from Paul that's very important for us to take with us. The first thing is that unforgiveness brings nothing but tears. In fact, Paul is so upset about this situation that it has caused him to not come to Corinth for some period of time. There's enough to this issue that Paul stays away. Have you ever known somebody that had a recent enough, and maybe not even recent, but a significant enough emotional wound because of the way someone has hurt them that you didn't even want to go to their house? Have you ever been that person? The simple fact of the matter is, unforgiveness can make us miserable. It really can. Paul writes, he says, so I made up my mind that I would not make another painful visit to you. It's painful for him. But there's another side of this hurt that it causes that I think we have to be mindful of before I move on. It's easy to forget. Someone wrongs you, you harbor unforgiveness in your heart. Isn't that hilarious? Someone's done you something wrong. So what do? You punish yourself. Because guess what? That person that did you wrong, while you're sitting there going, in the middle of the night, you're sitting. Have you ever lost sleep over this kind of thing? I have. Someone's wronged you, and you lose sleep over it. The other guy, sleeping like a baby. All you're doing is punishing yourself. I had a situation not too long ago. It was quite a few years ago. It was over a decade ago. I was working in ministry, and there was someone who actually had done something to sort of offend and harm several of us in this church, in this ministry, directly, through the words that he said and some of his actions. He had done something that was harmful. And he ended up leaving the church over the issue. And to be honest with you, not all of us were too sad that that had happened. And then quite a while later, an appropriate amount of time in my opinion, he actually came back. And he said, I realized what I did. I am sorry for it. Not only am I sorry for it, but I'd like to be restored to my position of responsibility, my position of accountability, my position of leadership in this particular area of the church, if that is acceptable to you. And I met with the two other people, other than myself, who had been most harmed by this individual. Now, in the world we live in, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me, right? So obviously, a possible way to react is to say to this individual, you know what? Just not going through this pain again. We're just not going through this pain again. So after we sat down and met, as you might imagine, because we were good church people, we said, we have to invite this person back. We have to let him back. We have to. If we follow Jesus, we have to do this. What's more, the three of us spoke about it, and we said, what's more, we know it's likely, based on this person's pattern of living, that this is going to happen again. And we are still going to extend forgiveness and reconciliation. Not only did we welcome him back into ministry, but we gave him a more significant role in leadership than we did before, based on a lot of factors that I don't have time to go through. And then I just braced myself for the next time. Because the first time he pulled his stunt, I lost sleep for a week. I could not sleep for a week. I said, this next time, I'm not losing any sleep. I am forgiving, and I got slapped here. You can slap me here too. But you know what? Next time, I'm just not losing sleep. The good news, there was no next time. When we offered forgiveness and reconciliation to this individual and brought him back into the life of the church the way that he had been before, he was changed. People, this guy was a real piece of work. I'm just telling you, he has since gone on. He's with Jesus now, which means he's got absolutely no imperfections anymore. But I'm telling you what, God did a miracle. And do you know what the first step of that miracle was? We forgive you. We welcome you back. Paul is trying to get them to initiate the first step in a miracle like that. Because unforgiveness affects us all. If we had held out unforgiveness towards this individual, it would have affected all of us. I'm convinced that we would have lost even more sleep. I'm convinced of it. It might have torn us up inside and that would have been the Holy Spirit getting at us saying, you know what? Jesus came, showed you how to live. What are you doing? Every now and then the Holy Spirit does that to me. Jesus came, taught you how to live. What are you doing? Now, I want to step back a moment because it sounds like, okay, if you wrong me, then whatever it is that, however you wrong me, it doesn't matter. When I forgive you, all bets are off. You can do whatever you want to ever again. That's not the case. I think simple understanding of how reality works in our world is enough to show us that that's not the case. In 2:6, he says, the punishment is enough for him. So there was some kind of punishment. I mean, I want you to think about that in terms of the world we live in. If you commit a crime, there's going to be a consequence, right? Example, I'm your next door neighbor, and I steal from you. Something significant. I'm caught. I beg for your forgiveness, and you give me that forgiveness. I still have to make reparations. Might even have to go to jail. I mean, we see these stories in the news from time to time, and they're lovely stories. Don't get me wrong. Someone has killed someone. And the family of the victim comes around this person and says, we forgive you. A few years ago, the Amish showed us how to do this. There was an incident where a bunch of people in an Amish community were killed by an absolutely crazy madman, horrible atrocity, act of violence, and they forgave him publicly. He still had to pay the price. But I bet it was a little easier to live. And who knows, maybe that was enough for that individual to say, these people are forgiving me because Jesus showed them how to do it. This Jesus must be worth following. Have you considered that the way that we forgive people might be the way that we show people that God is real? Might be our best ammunition for the gospel and for evangelism that we have, is simply living lives of forgiveness the way Jesus taught us. Now, this situation that we have here also reminds us that forgiveness is the work of God in the world. And I pardon me for keeping glancing here. Those words are important, and I wrote them down very importantly. Because sometimes we think that forgiveness is one of the things that we do, is one of the works that we do, is one of the tasks that we are about as Christians, as people who live the life of following Jesus, as people who understand the gospel. But I am telling you, forgiveness is the whole ball of wax. It's all of it. Jesus came for one reason: forgiveness and reconciliation. That was it. He came to bring us back to God. And we're supposed to live like that. We forget that sometimes, don't we? We see that scripture that says, no greater love has someone than this, than they lay down their life for their friend. Jesus is describing what he's going to do. Jesus is also describing what you are going to do, because we follow Jesus and we want to live like that. I can't even stress this enough, and it's bursting in my chest, because so often we do not understand this. In this world, it is so hard for us to understand that the ministry of forgiveness and reconciliation is the reason for the gospel. It is the reason we need to be reconciled to God, and it has been done for us by Jesus. Forgiveness is so important. Here's how important forgiveness is. Just a little while ago, we recited the Lord's Prayer together. And most of those things are things we ask God to do. Let your kingdom come. Let your will be done. Would you give us what we need for today? Would you deliver us from evil, please? Would you please not lead us into temptation? And would you forgive us regardless of what we do? Doesn't say that. And I'm sure Jesus was very careful with these words. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. It's almost like it's conditional, isn't it? I don't believe, don't get me wrong, I don't believe that we are not forgiven by God unless we forgive those who sin against us. Okay, I don't believe that's what is meant here. Here's what I do believe. If I am a person that does not forgive the person who wrongs me, I don't have the life of Jesus in me, and that's evidence. Forgive us our trespasses, and naturally, because we've been forgiven and we understand what that forgiveness is about, we will be the people who forgive the people who wrong us. We will go against the grain. We will not be like the world that holds grudges. We will not be the world that is wise enough to say, I will never trust that person again because they have wronged me. We will be like Jesus, who was foolish enough, and in the world's eyes, pardon my expression, stupid enough, in the world's eyes, not ours, to say, I'm going to forgive regardless. How severe? Now, every now and then I meet someone who says, I'm sorry, but this person has wronged me so much, I can't get past it. Now, I want to remind you about the one you follow. The one you follow is someone who came to bring God's love to the world in such a revolutionary way that the existing authorities of the time put him to death in the most horrible and cruel and painful process possible. The most horrible thing they had at their disposal. Hung on that cross in agony for hours before finally suffocating. And he chose his words that he spoke from that cross with great care. And at one point, he is up on the cross and he prays, Lord, these people who crucified me, just consign them to the flames of hell forever. No, that's not in the Bible. Jesus is in agony. He looks at the people who put him there, the people that were responsible for his pain, his anguish, and his suffering. I believed he looked right in their eyes. He looked right in their eyes and he said, Father, forgive them. Don't hold this against them. They have no idea what they're doing. Now they think they do, but they don't. They have no idea what they're doing. Forgive them. Don't hold this against them. Oh my goodness. If Jesus could forgive those people, who is it possible for me to forgive if I have the Spirit of Jesus living inside me and living through me and loving the world through me? Oh, anybody. Anybody. The possibilities are endless. This was a case of church discipline in Paul's letter. I love church discipline. It's something we don't do very much because this is the 21st century and it's really hard to do that. In those days, they could say to the person, look, you've wronged us. You're not part of our congregation, at least for a season. If we do that today, they simply go down the street to the other church. Or you have what I've seen more often than not is the person who walks into your congregation and they're on fire and they want to lead and they want to make things happen and they want to, oh my gosh, I got ideas and I'm going to work hard. I'm going to be the best volunteer you ever had. And if you could talk to their old pastor, you would find out that after about 6 months, they simply badmouthed you either behind your back or in front of your back, and they made all kinds of problems, and then they stormed out. They rage quit, as they like to call it. It happens a lot. And in that day, you couldn't. That person was not part of the congregation. There wasn't there wasn't a Baptist and a Methodist church in town. There was just this one gathering. And church discipline, in the 18th chapter of Matthew, we have the most misquoted verse of the Bible, I think, maybe. And that is, wherever two or more are gathered, there I am. And we always like to think when you show up for church, I remember one time, I think it was this last winter, it might have been the winter before, where the roads were just horrible and I knew none of you were coming. And it was just Dave and myself in this chapel, and we did the whole service. We did the whole service without you. Now, I only put the sermon online because my little camera can only record about 26 minutes of video. So after 26 minutes, it stops. So I just put the sermon online. But we had all the songs, right? We did the offering. We even did the announcements, and there was only the two of us. It was hilarious. It was also one of the most special times I've ever had in worship in my life. My heart races within me just remembering how wonderful that was. And then the joke was, well, wherever two or more are gathered, there Jesus is. Except that passage is talking about church discipline. If you actually look at that passage in context, it's not talking about worship or prayer or anything. It's saying if you got to discipline somebody, you need two or more people. You can't just have one guy beat up on another. So that's what we had happen here. So remember that next time you hear that. I have a joke with one of the other pastors locally. One of the other pastors in one of the churches locally, a guy named Chuck. And we were joking about this one day. And he says, and I said, yeah, I walked into a church one time and it said, wherever two or more gathered, there I am. And I said, look, you have a room dedicated to church discipline. And Chuck laughed because he felt the same exact way I did. No, you don't have a room. But that's okay. The good news is the Bible doesn't say wherever two or more are gathered, there I am when it comes to prayer and worship. When it comes to prayer and worship, guess what the number required is? 1. Jesus is present. If I had come here today and none of you had come, I'd still be doing my sermon. I might not do the visuals. I might not turn on the sound system. But I would still do the service and God would be here. Now, forgiveness, I did not struggle to find examples of forgiveness. I didn't. I have 3 for you. The first one occurred in 2004 when the Boston Red Sox finally won the World Series and forgave Bill Buckner. It didn't matter to him. It was just a game. But that was kind of funny. But there's a couple of stories that really came to mind that I have heard over the years. The first one is a story of Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela spent years, decades in prison, in horrible conditions, in South Africa, in a country that had institutionalized racism woven into its very fabric like few countries ever have on earth. And one day, all of that fell. Mandela was released from prison and eventually became the president of South Africa, the first non-white president of South Africa. And there's all kinds of stories about how he handled things in a Christ-like fashion that many people would not have, and no one would have faulted him in this world if he had behaved differently. But there's a story about a day when he is actually having dinner with a group of men that I believe were his guards. And he sees a man at a nearby table and he asks them to bring him over to have dinner with them. This man sits across from Mandela, and during the dinner, his hands are shaking the entire time. I'm going to get emotional. His hands are shaking the entire time. And after the dinner, this man gets up and he leaves, and the other people around the table say to Nelson, they say, should we go find out if he's sick, if he needs medical help? He says, no, he doesn't. When I was in prison, I would beg for water, and that's the man who abused me. That man expected unforgiveness. That man expected retribution. And what that man got was forgiveness and reconciliation. And who knows how that might have changed that man's life. I have one more story. Please don't bring up this next image, until I actually say the name. A great black American once spoke of being beaten into a pool of his own blood in May of 1961 in South Carolina, all for entering a whites-only waiting room. Years later, he was visited by the man who had attacked him, now in his 70s, accompanied by his son. He said, "I am one of the people who beat you. I had been a member of the Klan. I want to apologize. Will you forgive me?" And tearfully, this man accepted this ex-Klansman's apology and forgave him. And he said, "It is the power of the way of peace, the way of love." He said, as Dr. Martin Luther King said, "Hate is too heavy a burden to bear. You must never, ever hate. The way of love is the better way. The way of peace is a better way."